What's going on, everyone? Today is December 14th, 2022. My name is Derek. Welcome back to this edition of the Superstream. Today is edition 43 of the Superstream, and this number holds a little bit of relevance to what we'll be talking about throughout the course of this video. Notice how in the standard Pythagorean or reduction form of Gematria, the word homosexual equals 43. Now, in the reverse method of this same cipher, the state of Colorado sums to 43. And within the last couple weeks, I've mentioned this multiple times in relation to the governor of Colorado, the first ever gay male to hold the position of governor in the United States, happens to be the 43rd governor of Colorado. And as we'll discuss in this video, this is anything but a coincidence. For those of you who are watching this stream archived, this video should have chapters down below it, so you can skip ahead to any one of the news stories you see on your screen at any time you'd like. And we're going to cover this overarching theme of what went on for the past week. And to understand this, we examine the media through the lens of Gematria, this ancient practice that codifies the language with an alphanumeric numbering system. And on the screen, you see the base 4 ciphers of Gematria. These are the most basic ones, the most simple, and the ones I primarily use in my research. Now, none of the mainstream media outlets are legitimate news organizations. Not only do they fail to deliver real, important news to the public, but they actually engage in large disinformation campaigns on a daily basis, ultimately gaslighting the public into a fabricated reality where down is up, right is both wrong and left, and now even this year, men can be pregnant women. Now, oftentimes, you don't need numerology to see that coincidences in the news are truly anything but. To show this, let's rewind a few days to December 8th of last week. On that date, WNBA star Brittney Griner was returned to the United States in return for a convicted arms dealer. And this is a perfect example of how stories are published with the intent of dividing the public. One half of the U.S. is happy to have an American citizen back, while the other is upset we gave up a dangerous convicted arms dealer. And this is all intentional. We are being trolled by these organizations. Think about Brittney Griner's name. The name Griner is just one letter off of grinder. You just change the E to a D, one letter off, literally. And this is the world's largest gay dating app. Brittney Griner, a member of the WNBA, is indeed married to another woman. On the same exact date as her release, December 8th, Nancy Pelosi led Congress's passage of the Respect for Marriage Act, which amended a previous bill to guarantee same-sex marriage would be recognized at a federal level. Pelosi played the Democrats' favorite card by claiming they are combating extremism. You know, which is odd because not that long ago, the majority of Americans were actually against same-sex marriage. So does this mean we lived in a country full of extreme bigots 20 years ago? Well, of course not, but this just goes to show you that a lot of this social change is engineered. Later that night, on December 8th, the LA Rams, who were the first team to draft an openly gay player in the NFL, won their game on a last-second extra point off the foot of a kicker named Matt Gay. Later that same NFL weekend on Sunday, Chiefs linebacker Willie Gay scored his first career touchdown in his 3rd season, picking off Russell Wilson in what definitely looked like a scripted, staged play this past weekend. The very next day, December 9th, journalist Grant Wahl suddenly dropped dead at the World Cup. It was originally speculated that Wahl was murdered as he had angered officials by wearing a rainbow shirt to promote acceptance because his brother was gay. This was all exactly 1 week after the death of MLB Hall of Famer pitcher Gaylord Perry. So when we say that these stories are coded by the numbers, here's a closer look at what we mean. Brittney Griner wears number 42 for the WNBA's Phoenix Mercury. She was in Russian custody for exactly 42 weeks. It was 42 weeks after she was arrested that she was released. Notice how Russia sums to 42 using the S exception in Gematria. The last World Cup in 2018 was in Russia, and it ended with a score of 4-2, France over Croatia. France and Croatia both in the World Cup semifinals this year. And again, this all connected to the World Cup as Grant Wahl dying there. So this number 42, we see there's something going on with this. Well, one large nation that's not very fond of gay people is Iran, whom the United States knocked out of the World Cup. In the alphabetic order, Iran equals 42. And on December 8th, we learned that Iran carried out its first hanging of a protester for taking part in recent anti-government demonstrations. December 8th, the same day that Nancy Pelosi signed this new marriage act. Consider how this act was signed 42 days after we learned that Nancy Pelosi's husband was attacked by a hammer in a very bizarre news story that was so strange that even GOP officials mocked Paul Pelosi, claiming that it was a gay lover's spat. So to get Brittney Griner back to the U.S., this means that convicted arms dealer Victor Bout is, quote, back in the USSR. Back in the USSR was the opening track of the Beatles' White Album, which was sung by John Lennon. Brittney Griner's release from a Russian jail fell exactly 42 years to the day after the death of John Lennon, who died at the age of exactly 40 years and 2 months old. Notice how the name Lennon has matching 74 gematria with 42. Brittney Griner, born on the date, leaving 74 days in the year. Now, John's songwriting partner back in the USSR, it was also written by Paul McCartney. His name is Paul. Paul is also the name of Nancy Pelosi's husband, who was involved in this weird gay hammer attack ritual. Back in the USSR is the opening track off of the Beatles' White Album. And notice how in Gematria, the reduction method, the phrase White Album sums to 42. So what are the odds that all of this is a coincidence? It's virtually zero. This should go to prove to you that the news is 100% scripted by the numbers. Again, providing a false reality for the quote-unquote fools who still believe what's being published on a daily basis. In numerology, there's something called prime numbers. These are numbers that are only divisible by 1 and itself. The 42nd prime number is 181. Using the alphabetic order, the phrase prisoner exchange sums to 181. These are also the same digits found in the birthday of Brittney Griner, 18/10, representing 181. With capital letters, the name Griner equals 181. And she was stuck in the USSR. Of course, it's not called that anymore. It's just Russia now. But USSR, also with this gematria of 181. There's a lot of alignments to Jesus here as well. We talked a lot about the number 42. Notice how the word new equals 42, so does New Testament. And the New Testament begins with the 42 generations to Jesus. Lenin with matching gematria with Jesus and Jesus Christ. Of course, Lenin was all about spreading love, right? Much like the Christ consciousness aspect of Jesus. Notice how Jesus the Messiah also has this 181 value. The media likes to incorporate Jesus rituals through numerology embedded into these stories quite frequently. The Beatles' White Album, notice how White Album has the same gematria as Jesus Christ in Latin. We'll talk about that cipher more in a second. Brittney Griner was born exactly 62 weeks after the USSR was dissolved. Remember, the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991. That was an interesting number because notice how the word lesbian sums to 62 in ordinal. So does Soviet Union in reverse reduction. And Griner was released from Russia on a date with primary numerology of 62. The date was also 12-8. If you multiply all the digits in the date, you get a product of 128. And measuring from Brittney Griner's birth back to the dissolution of the USSR, it was 1 year, 2 months, and 8 days. Notice how the name Brittney Griner has matching capital letter gematria with the name Victor Anatolievich Bout, which is the full name of this arms dealer. Regarding capital letter ciphers, this is an important part of gematria. You'll see here the alphabetic order is still used. Some people call this the classroom cipher on top, as this is the first cipher that most children are introduced to in kindergarten. The caps added method adds 26 for each capital letter in the cipher. So again, using the alphabetic order, but with special attention to capital letters. So Victor Bout has a fun nickname. He's known as the Merchant of Death. And merchants making money off of arms deals particularly, well, the god of commerce and merchants is Mercury. And again, what team does Brittney Griner play for? The Phoenix Mercury. Certainly no coincidences here. Now, there was a wealth of fascinating numerology with the release of Victor Bout back to the USSR. Check out how old John Lennon would have been on this date. 30,011 days old, with the digits 311 in him. In Latin gematria, the name Victor Bout sums to 1301, which is basically identical to his birthday, the 13th of January, the date that you can write 1301 as they do in Russia. He was released 133 months and 1 week after he was initially convicted. He was returned 30 years, 11 months, 13 days after the USSR was dissolved. Griner's arrest was even 131 days before Lenin's birthday. So you have all these 1-3 connections here. This birthday, January 13th, and doesn't this guy look like a character out of Metal Gear Solid or something, especially with that mustache? The name Brittney sums to 113 to match the birthday. With capital letters, Russia equals 113. And there was a lot of hoopla in the media because a Marine named Paul Whelan wasn't returned to the U.S. Notice how the name Paul Whelan also sums to 113. So here we have a riddle connected to the White Album. Brittney Griner, I believe she's mixed race. But the number 42 in history has historically been stamped negatively on black people. One post I commonly link to explore this fact is in NASCAR a couple years ago when the number 42 car driven by Kyle Larson was suspended for saying the N-word, which sums to 42. And the name Kyle Larson equals 42, racial slur 42, driving the 42 car. So when you write out the words black and white, you get this value of 113 ordinal and 1103 in Latin gematria. Latin, which was formerly called Jewish on my old website, which was actually a bit of a misnomer. This is also known as Agrippa's key, and is what I consider to be the most significant method of gematria, particularly outside of the base 4. I teach this in every video. And this alignment here, the double 113 between black and white, was pretty interesting considering all of the 113s with this story. And remember, 113, a number associated with lies and deception. In both ordinal and reverse, all of the words you see on your screen sum to 113. And I challenge anyone to find another word or idea that has as many synonyms that sum to the same number as this. All right, so let's take a look at the next story. I think that about covers it for this one. Victor Bout, this guy who's back in the USSR. Notice how he was born 97 days after John Lennon's birthday. And when Back in the USSR came out, he was exactly 97 weeks old. Well, in the alphabetic order, the Beatles, which is the official name of the White Album, sums to 97. Notice how the name Griner also has this 97 with capital letters. Back in the USSR came out 314 days after Victor Bout's birthday. That stood out because when Brittney Griner was arrested, she was exactly 31 years and 4 months old. And when she was released, it was 314 days before her next birthday. Of course, 314, the first 3 digits of pi. It's not uncommon to see this number coded several times into the same story. So next up, I wanted to take a glance at this story from Iran, where they allegedly hung a protester. And of course, for the last several months, there's been massive demonstrations in Iran against their government. Demonstrations that are so strong that they even cheered their soccer team losing to the United States, I heard. Isn't that wild? So this was also December 8th. Again, a historically gay-hating nation that the U.S. knocked out of the World Cup. And in the alphabetic order, Iran equals 42. Again, the 42nd anniversary of the death of John Lennon. As I pointed out earlier, the name Lenin has matching gematria with 42. The man killed in this hanging was Mohsen Shikari, which equals 74 and 88. The name Mohsen, just like Lenin. The ruler of Iran, Ali Khamenei, sums to 88, just like Lenin. In the reverse alphabetic order, where Z is 1, Y is 2, through A is 26, the nation of Iran sums to 66. And this is pretty interesting because notice how John Lennon has the same gematria as the number 66 when spelled out. The 66th book of the Bible is Revelation, which has the same numbers as John Lennon. The book of Revelation was written by John of Patmos, a man who shares the same first name with John Lennon. December 8th was 66 days after Iran's national holiday. Before the holiday, which is February 11th. Notice how Islamic also equals 66. The word hang equals 66 in standard English gematria. That cipher very similar to the Latin method, but uses the current 26-letter alphabet instead. This story fell 1,066 days after a Ukrainian Boeing plane crashed in Iran following a missile that struck it. And this turned out to be something that Iran wound up taking blame for. So 1,066 days later. And you may recall the number 66 in connection to Iran previously. Back in 2018, 66 people died in a plane crash in Tehran, Iran. And the city of Tehran also equals 66. And I'm noticing now it says 65. Okay, so earlier reports were 66 people. So on the date that this story was published, it looks like it was a month later they updated this. So originally 66 people. You see the trend here. So let's take another look at John Lennon. Notice how the name John Winston Lennon, his full name, sums to 82 in reduction. And that's the current age that Lennon would be. He would currently be 82 years old. The name of the man that they hung, Mohsen Shikari, his name sums to 82, just like ritual sacrifice. John Lennon's age also stands out here. Again, he was 30,011 days old. We mentioned this in the last story. The word Islamic does have gematria of 311. The number 311 is another prime number, the 64th prime number. And this connects back to Beatles. Beatles equals 64 in the alphabetic order. The man they hung, Mohsen Shikari, his name equals 64 in standard reduction. The name Mohsen Shikari also matches sacrifice, 206, reversed through Latin. In standard gematria, the name also equals 496. 496 is the third perfect number. And if you saw my video on the death of Christine McVie from Fleetwood Mac, her last name was perfect when she was born. And you'll see here that perfect number matches ritual sacrifice. She died a perfect number of days before the next American eclipse. We'll talk more about eclipses as this video goes on. So next I want to talk more about Grant Wahl, who was this American soccer journalist who fell ill a couple weeks after arriving in Qatar. And then while covering the Argentina-Netherlands game in the quarterfinals, he suddenly fell back in his chair and just dropped dead. And this was, of course, part of this big gay riddle that I talked about to open this video up. Now, one very interesting thing about Grant Wahl here is that Grant Wahl was the husband of a woman named Celine Gounder or Gounday. And this woman served on the COVID-19 advisory board for Joe Biden on his transition team. So this guy has heavy connections. And, you know, a part of me wonders if he really even died. I mean, who knows what's going on in Qatar over there? This would be a candidate for a fake death, I believe. Because a lot of people immediately came out and said, oh, he must have been vaxxed and boosted. And as I've been saying on this channel for months now, there's something else going on. You know, by putting all these stories where people suddenly drop dead in the news, they're trying to instill fear in the people who did take the vaccine. And I'm not saying the vaccine is safe. I'm not allowed to say it's dangerous on YouTube, but the point is, I don't think it's quite as bad as some people are leading on to believe. So let's talk about how this happened by the numbers. Of course, as soon as I saw that she was part of this COVID board, you know, you knew it wasn't going to be the shot that killed him, right? And sure enough, now they're saying that he had an aortic aneurysm. It was an undetected heart condition, which the media is trying to pass off as normal now, despite this not really being the case prior to the quote-unquote pandemic. So let's talk about how this story was heavily by the numbers. So Grant Wahl dies one day after the Respect for Marriage Act is passed by Congress. The Respect for Marriage Act was an amendment to the Defense of Marriage Act, which was signed by Bill Clinton back in 1996. The Defense of Marriage Act was passed by the 104th United States Congress. So the number 104 is important here. In reverse reduction, the phrase soccer journalist sums to 104. This soccer journalist was named Grant Wahl, which equals 104. And he died while covering the World Cup, which equals 104. This year's World Cup is held in Qatar, which has gematria of 104 in multiple large number methods, Fibonacci and reverse caps. 104 is a number that I talk about from time to time. This is connected to the total solar eclipse code. Notice how total solar eclipse sums to 104. Measuring from the death of Grant Wahl to the date of the next total solar eclipse is 1 year and 4 months exactly. His wife worked for the COVID-19 Advisory Board. Grant Wahl died exactly 1,004 days after the World Health Organization originally declared a COVID pandemic. Now, I do want to point out here, they've recently changed the date of death for Grant Wahl, and I believe this may reflect the date that it was in Qatar when he died. Wow, they also changed his age, too. Oh my gosh. Well, believe what you want, truth seekers. I can only give you the information as it was listed at the time. But this is, nothing new for them to do this. So some of these counts may look a little wonky now, but most of these are still accurate. But when he died, it was still December 9th in the United States. That's the point I'm making here. So he had this wife named Celine, a member of the Government Advisory Board, which means she's full of shit. Well, what are the odds that one day before the death of Grant Wahl, Celine Dion was in the media after she was diagnosed with stiff person syndrome? And here's another story where people were like, oh, she must have taken the vaccine, therefore she got this weird illness. Once again, there's something more going on. But this came out on December 8th, the day before the Grant Wahl episode. Celine Dion, Celine Gaunda. She's even got the same E, accented E here in her name. Celine. And consider how Selena, is like an adjective for the moon. The word Selenik connects to the moon, and we'll talk more about how this is an eclipse riddle. The word eclipse in Gematria sums to 33 reduction. Celine Dion was born on March 30th, the date written 3-3, or 330 on the calendar. And measuring from his wife's birthday to his death, it was 33 weeks later. Remember, 33 has the same gematria as ritual human sacrifice, 895. This all goes back to the New Testament where Judas betrayed Jesus, leading to his ritual sacrifice. Judas equals 895, and then Jesus equals 985. So, COVID-19 allegedly developed in the year 2019. And I thought that's interesting because this woman's name, Celine Gounder, sums to 219. But also notice her ordinal value of 132. This is the reverse value of vaccine, 132. Her husband was a pro at journalism. Journalism equals 132. And this journalist died 132 days before the next solar eclipse, which is a hybrid eclipse. He died while watching Argentina play at Lusail Stadium. Notice how both Argentina and Lusail Stadium sum to 44. The name Wahl also equals 44, just like the word kill, 44. This guy's birthday was... Oh, they changed his birthday too? Wow, they changed his birthday, they changed his birth year, and they changed his death date. So I don't know what to do with this decode, but this post has everything as it was listed back on the date he died. Speaking of coronavirus and COVID, the coronavirus pandemic overtook the world in 2020. Notice how coronavirus pandemic equals 220, just like orthocoronavirinae, the virus that caused it. Operation Warp Speed got the vaccines to the public. It was Donald John Trump who was responsible for it. Well, notice how Grant Wahl sums to 2020. This using standard gematria, but the reverse method. The date he died, originally December 9th, is the date that leaves 22 days in the year. And 22 is a significant number to football. Of course, there's 22 players on the field at all times. He had worn an LGBTQ shirt in the days prior to his death. LGBTQ equals 22. So does FIFA. The word football equals 22. And Grant Wahl actually ran a publication called Football that he launched in the year 2020. And now here we are in the year 22. This is the 22nd World Cup in history. American football is run by the National Football League, which equals 220. So originally it was reported that Grant Wahl was 48 years old and then he died one day after his birthday. The word gay equals 48 in reverse gematria. This is also a number connected to the moon. The Latin name for the moon, Luna, equals 48. Of course, the word moon sums to 57 and 21, just like Qatar. The real number of the COVID pandemic has been 666, which I highlighted in a video I made in April of 2020. Grant Wahl's wife has gematria of 69 and 66. This is all a day after the Gay Marriage Act. And look how old Celine Gounder was. 16,666 days. The day before her husband died. This is another number connected to the moon. Argentina equals the moon in gematria. That was the team that he watched. Don't forget, when you're talking about Argentina, two of the first three letters are AG. And on the periodic table, AG is silver, which is essentially the color of the moon. See my last super stream for more on the World Cup, Argentina. I told you guys in my last super stream that Argentina was definitely going to be in the finals, and now they are, so... You know, I don't bet on sports often. I wait till a really, really good riddle. And that's, if you're going to bet on sports, that's the way to do it. You don't go digging for riddles in games. So, let's talk about the NFL a little bit. And this huge game that Baker Mayfield had. Don't know how many NFL fans watch my videos. I would guess a good chunk of you, but what happened in the NFL last week on Thursday Night Football was completely unprecedented, and even the announcers were talking about how this made a mockery of the league. The story here is that Baker Mayfield, who was released from the Carolina Panthers earlier in the week, signed with the Rams, and in less than 48 hours, he was able to learn enough of the playbook to become their starting quarterback. And despite 50 minutes of mediocrity, sub-mediocrity to be more accurate, Mayfield turned it on in the last two drives, leading the Rams to 2 touchdowns that won the game. And, you know, they were talking about how improbable, how impossible this was. A 17-16 win on Thursday night. This game took place just 3 days after Monday Night Football, and on Monday Night Football, the New Orleans Saints lost to the Buccaneers in a very similar game. The Saints were winning 16-3 until the last 10 minutes or so when Tom Brady led the Buccaneers on 2 straight touchdown drives to win 17-16. So the NFL literally used the exact same script for 2 consecutive games with the same exact final score. So this game was an homage to Baker Mayfield. In gematria, the name Baker Mayfield sums to 239 in the reverse order. The date of this game fell a span of 239 days after Baker Mayfield's birthday. In this image here in the post, notice how Mayfield was celebrating with his teammates, and there's one Las Vegas Raider in the picture. And I circled his number. We'll talk about that in a second, but this player is a star lineman for the Raiders. His name is Max Crosby. Check out how the name Max Crosby equals 144. That's identical to Baker Mayfield's birthday, the 14th of April. Max Crosby wears number 98 as was circled here in this photo. And on the end of this game, Baker Mayfield led his team on a 98-yard touchdown drive. So his team had to start from their own 2-yard line, and they had to go all the way down the field, but miraculously they did it. Well, check out how in multiple ciphers the name Baker sums to 98, both reverse and Latin. And this was his first game for the LA Rams. LA Rams equals 98. The name Tom Brady equals 98. Tom Brady spent most of his career with the Patriots, which equals 98. And it was Tom Brady whose game-winning drives that he emulated just 3 days after the game with the exact same score. The Rams were the first team to draft an openly gay NFL player. That NFL player was named Michael Sam. And check out how many days after Michael Sam's birthday Baker Mayfield was born. That's right. From January 7th to April 14th is a span of 98 days. So check this out. Michael Sam is currently 32 years old, but next month, he'll be 33 years old. In Gematria, the name Michael sums to 33 reduction. The name Sam equals 33 ordinal. This is the Gematria of the word gay in the alphabetic order. And to win this game for the Rams, their kicker, named Matt Gay, kicked the game-winning extra point, which put 33 points on the board. Again, the score was 16-17. And let's even look closer at this number. 16-17? Well, 1,617 is the 33rd pentagonal number. A pentagonal number, as you see here on the right side of your screen, successive pentagon sizes are laid out here. And this is a new sequence I added to the calculator with the last update. There's definitely some relevance to it, as we see here. And look at Matt Gay's picture on Wikipedia. They recently updated this, and they actually changed this picture back to his old uniform in Tampa Bay. And it looks like the reason they did that is because they could show him holding this big, long stick. And here he is wearing short shorts, and everyone behind him is having a gay old time, all laughing and smiling. I mean, this is hilarious. It's just hilarious. So anytime there's anything with Baker Mayfield going on in the news, it's actually a Ronald Reagan riddle. And the connection here is very simple. Baker Mayfield's middle name is Reagan. And for his profession, he throws a ball with the name Wilson on it. Ronald Reagan's middle name is Wilson. So I've explained this connection in the past. Ronald Reagan was born in Tampico, which equals 112. And when he died, he was exactly 1,120 months old. The name Baker Reagan Mayfield sums to 112. Baker Mayfield also equals 112. Notice how these names also sum to 77, matching Tampico, the city where Ronald Reagan was born in Illinois. Of course, Baker Mayfield was replaced by Deshaun Watson, the quarterback from Houston. Houston shares those 112 and 77 values. And that trade was 1 month and 12 days after Reagan's birthday. And it was on the 77th day of the year. So here we are again, another Baker Mayfield story, and another Ronald Reagan riddle. Check out how old Ronald Reagan would have been on the date of Baker Mayfield's amazing comeback. 40,848 days old. Well, check this out. The word gay equals 408 and 48. Huh. And Ronald Reagan, 408, 48 days. Look at that. 408, 48. The word gay, 408, 48. And the name Ronald Wilson Reagan, look at how well this overlaps with National Football League. Oops, Ronald Wilson Reagan. So we got 202, 85, 1138. Let me fix my matches here. It's a strong overlap, as you can see. Many of the same numbers. Now, this is where things get a little weird. Last year, I'll try and link this video below down in the description, but last year I made a video on this big tornado that hit Mayfield, Kentucky. Now, this tornado struck right near the intersection of the two Great American total solar eclipses. And it was the early morning hours of December 11th, which means that Baker Mayfield's game this year, this big comeback, was virtually exactly 1 year after this Mayfield tornado. Now, this year, it was Sunday's games that were played on December 11th, the anniversary of the tornadoes. Baker Mayfield played on Thursday night this week. This will be a strong topic of my next video. I'm going to do a decode on the death of Mississippi State coach Mike Leach, which was a heavily, heavily significant Jesuit eclipse sacrifice ritual. But, yeah, I mean, here we go. Again, same stuff, same numbers. The first game that the Cleveland Browns and Baker Mayfield played after those tornadoes last year, Mayfield led his team to a 24-22 victory in that game. And then 2 weeks later, he would lose 24-22. Well, 2,422 is the number of days between the two eclipses. If you split that number in half, you get 1211, which was the date of the tornadoes. These two eclipses are both 1,211 days away from the 2020 eclipse over Argentina, which ended lunation 1211. So this is a really deep decode. Check out my channel in a few days for more on the death of Mike Leach. That's going to be a big one. Speaking of the NFL, there was another huge game played this past week, or at least a very significant one, where new quarterback Brock Purdy, who plays for the San Francisco 49ers, rose to the challenge and defeated the GOAT, Tom Brady. And this was a big game for Brady because he was playing in San Francisco, which is near San Mateo, where he was born. So a whole bunch of his family and friends were at the game to watch this live. Well, instead of seeing Tom Brady blow it up like he normally does, he lost to this new quarterback, Brock Purdy. And this here was a heavily numeric ritual. We begin with the name Brock Purdy, which sums to 133. This syncs up with San Francisco 49ers in Sumerian Gematria. Sumerian Gematria takes the same alphabetic order, but multiplies it by 6, which is the most significant number, at least single-digit number, connected to time. Brock Purdy was drafted in this year's NFL draft in Las Vegas, Nevada. And notice how Las Vegas, Nevada equals 133, just like Brock Purdy. It just so happens that the team from Las Vegas is who Baker Mayfield defeated. But Brock Purdy wasn't just any player taken in this NFL draft. Brock Purdy was officially Mr. Irrelevant, meaning he was the absolute last player selected in the NFL draft. And before Brock Purdy, no player had ever completed a forward pass as a quarterback in the NFL. So this is big for a guy named Mr. Irrelevant to actually be relevant. When Brock Purdy was drafted on the final day of the draft, April 30th, it was exactly 124 days after his birthday. In Gematria, the word irrelevant sums to 124. And here, Mr. Irrelevant defeated the Tampa Bay Bucks, which equals 124. Notice how both Mr. Irrelevant and Irrelevant each have Gematria of 65 in reduction. Well, this game was played on December 11th, which was a date with primary numerology of 65. Now, I saw a couple highlights from this game, and the announcers actually pointed out the exact age difference between Brock Purdy and Tom Brady. They said, Brock Purdy is 22 years, 146 days younger than Tom Brady. And that 146 stood out right away, because in Gematria, irrelevant equals 146 in reverse. They're also 22 years apart. And Mr. Irrelevant also sums to the 22nd prime number. But back to this 146. San Francisco 49ers sums to 146 in Gematria. Tom Brady's full name sums to 146 in that same method. If you include Junior, Brady's full name equals 1197. And look how old Brock Purdy was for this game, 1,197 weeks. The name Brock Purdy also has some interesting overlap with the word irrelevant. Real quickly, I wanted to touch on Brady's Gematria here. I mentioned how his name sums to 1197. This here is a cipher called Satanic Gematria. We're still using the alphabetic order, but here we start on the number 36. This is because the number 666 is the 36th triangular number, and in this satanic cipher, Satanic Gematria sums to 666. If you add 6 plus 6 plus 6, you get a sum of 18, and the 18th prime number is where this cipher ends. So this is also one that the occult seems to be fond of, and I don't decode often in this method. If you ask some people on YouTube, I use different ciphers every day. I'm doing new things all the time, but literally nothing could be further from the truth. On this channel, there's no ego, no lies, no bullshit, just numbers. To cap off this decode on Brock Purdy, I wanted to explain how the number 13 was heavily coded into this game as well. First off, notice how the date of this game, 12 plus 11 plus 22, had numerology of 45. 45 is the value of the number 13 in both reduction methods. 45 and 45. Tom Brady is currently 45 years old. Not only that, but he was also 130 days after his birthday, which is a lot like the number 13. Earlier this year, Brock Purdy was drafted in Las Vegas. Las Vegas equals 130 in reverse. Brock Purdy happens to wear number 13 for his team, and he got his first start in the 49ers' 13th game of the season. Now, the number 13 is very, very significant to the San Francisco 49ers. First of all, consider how 4 plus 9 is 13. That's the very simple way to do it. In Gematria, San Francisco 49ers equals 213. Kind of like two 13s. If you write out 49ers, it sums to 1313. Also, his first name, Brock, equals 49. Just like the team he plays for, the 49ers. Brock making his big splash in the year 22. Brock equals 22 for the record. All right, a few more news stories to cover here for you. First off, we learned the other day that something like, what has it been? 34 years after the Lockerbie air disaster over Scotland, the man, or one of the men charged with this attack, was brought into U.S. custody after all this time. So here I want to talk about how this story was very much by the numbers. And we're also going to talk about the Lockerbie bombing itself. And in the second part of this decode, we're going to be talking about the eclipse code and how the cabal lined this significant event, which occurred on the winter solstice, up with several solar and lunar eclipses. Actually, just solar, I think, we'll stick with. But first of all, let's take a look at this. Pan Am Flight 103. This is the plane that exploded over Lockerbie, Scotland in the year 88. In the alphabetic order, Scotland equals 88. The city in Scotland that was the site of the crash was Lockerbie. Notice how Lockerbie has the same gematria as plane bomb. Furthermore, Scotland equals 308 Latin, which is the same as plane crash. And this 163 you see in reverse, that's the 38th prime number. So a lot of connections between Lockerbie, Scotland, and plane bomb and plane crash. In Gematria, the word Scottish equals 32. And this is relevant because it's the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry that is one of the largest secret societies in the world, maybe the largest, and is responsible for a lot of the higher-ups in government and media. It was exactly 32 years to the day after the bombing that the first man was charged with this attack. So here we have the arrest of a guy named, we'll stick with Al-Marimi. And Al-Marimi, he was just captured this week, but the charges were initially filed on the 32nd anniversary of the bombing back in 2020. So here we go with the number 32 again. In Gematria, the word bomb equals 32. The word crash equals 32. So does the word disaster. 32 reduction. Even the word accident gives us a 32. Now, previously, the only man convicted of the bombing was Abdelbasset al-Megrahi, and he was convicted of the crimes exactly 32 weeks before the 9/11 attacks. And consider the obvious connections here, right? A massive plane bomb over the UK. 9/11, we had 4 airplanes crashing, one of them into the ground, just like this one, allegedly. This guy, both of these guys convicted of this attack were Libyan. This brings us to the former Libyan leader, Muammar Gaddafi. Notice how the last name Gaddafi equals 32. And on the date 3/2, or March 2nd, back in 79, he became the leader of Libya. Libya sums to 32. Gaddafi was killed back in the year 2011 during the Arab Spring, and the forces that killed him were backed by President Barack Obama. And notice how the name Barack Obama also yields a 32. The name Obama equals 32. The President of America, America equals 32. I noticed something more about this 32 as well. Notice how the 32nd prime is 131. Well, the 131st prime is 739, and 739 is the name coded into the serial number of this aircraft that crashed. Muammar Gaddafi was killed on the date October 20th, or 1020. Notice how the word sacrifice has gematria of 1020. In ordinal, ritual human sacrifice is 211, and he died in the year 2011. Now, the number 211 is the 47th prime number. Notice how the word killing equals 211 and 47, with the K exception. This week's news of a suspect in custody fell exactly 4,070 days after Muammar Gaddafi was killed. And it was also 407 months after the actual bombing. Notice how the country of Scotland equals 47. This ritual was heavily connected to the Jesuit order, also known as the Society of Jesus. Now, even if you go back 15 years on Wikipedia, you will see that the Jesuits still operate in the exact same number of nations, 112 nations. The Jesuits seem to be pretty fond of this number 112. Notice how the name of the suspect that was arrested here in this news story last week, his name sums to 1012 in Latin Gematria. The name Muammar Gaddafi sums to 112 ordinal. The Jesuit emblem has the letters IHS, which stands for Jesus Hominum Salvator in Latin. This phrase sums to 112 with the S exception. Notice how Jesus Hominum Salvator also sums to 266, which matches Muammar Gaddafi, 266. Jesus Hominum Salvator, which means Jesus, Savior of Man, also sums to 274 in the alphabetic order. And when Muammar Gaddafi died, it was exactly a span of 274 months after the Lockerbie bombing. This is also 1,191 weeks and 1 day, 11911. That's a lot of 119 and 9/11. Of course, this is the date that's most associated with air disaster here in the United States, September 11th. Pan American Airways is a big part of this. This is the name of the airline that was involved in this Lockerbie disaster. Notice how in Gematria, Pan American World Airways sums to 119 with the S exception. And when they commenced operations, it was October 19th, another date with the 119 code in it. This company's full name also summed to the 56th prime number. 56 is the value of Society of Jesus, which is the other name for the Jesuits. And notice these digits in ordinal. Society of Jesus, 191, the same digits in 911. Pan American Airways, their original name, also this 191 number. Now, if you take the number 911 and turn it upside down, you get the number 116. The Jesuit order's motto is Ad Maiorem Dei Gloriam, and in Latin this sums to 116, kind of an upside down 911. Of course, in numerology we drop these zeros in the result. So a very significant number to the Jesuit order is 270. This same phrase translates to for the greater glory of God, which equals 270 in the alphabetic order. The Jesuit anniversary of September 27th is typically the 270th day of the year. Society of Jesus equals the 270th prime number in trigonal. This brings us to the Pan American Airlines. Pan American sums to 270 in the Latin method of Gematria, and the number of people killed on this Pan American flight was exactly 270. This was flight number 103. It blew up over Scottish Airways. Scottish equals 103. But also notice how Pan Am equals 270 and 27. Pan American Airways was founded in the year 27. And when they shut down a few years after the Lockerbie disaster, that happened on a date with reduced numerology of 27. The Jesuit order was founded in the year 1540. And if you measure from the air disaster in 1988 to the end of Pan American World Airways, it was exactly 154 weeks. This is the Gematria of ritual sacrifice. The man they just arrested, his name equals 154. The word crash, Scotland, with alternate Gematria of 154. And I just thought it was interesting that Pan American World Airways was founded on the 73rd day of the year. And then they commenced operations on the date leaving 73 days in the year. And that's a number commonly associated with sacrifice. So with how far ahead our mainstream news is scripted, it wouldn't surprise me at all if this plane crash was potentially scripted as far back as the 20s. Sounds crazy. I don't even know if that's true, but the way this lines up, I suppose anything's possible. And I think the best evidence for what I just claimed is right here. So if you measure from the date that Pan American World Airways began operations to the date of the Lockerbie disaster, it was exactly 254 mercurial years, or orbits. And September 11th is the 254th day of the year, and 9/11 was a riddle connected to the god Mercury. Consider how Mercury is the god of financial gain, commerce, messages and communication, trickery, merchants. These are all themes of the World Trade Center. The World Trade Center, commerce, financial gain. Think about how the World Trade Center had giant antenna on top, allowing for messages to be communicated across the city. And 9/11, no doubt, was an act of trickery. Mercury is also the god of travelers, and it was a few thousand travelers who were killed in airplanes on 9/11. So the fact that this was 254 mercurial years exactly after their establishment on a date that reflects 119, definitely coordinated. These coordinations don't stop here. There's definitely a strong eclipse riddle with all of this. Now, 9/11, 2001, the date of the attacks in the United States, that year there was a total solar eclipse on the summer solstice. This Lockerbie disaster occurred on the winter solstice. And this is all relevant to the Jesuits, as we will see. Check out the date that the Jesuits were founded. 9/27 of 1540. I've mentioned this before, but it's important and needs to be understood. This date fell just 3 days before an eclipse from Saros 136. Solar Saros 136 began during the date 13/6 in the year 1360 here in the United States. It says the 14th, but that eclipse began on the 13th in the United States time zone. So that's pretty wild, because when you write out the Jesuits, it sums to 136. On top of that, the Jesuit order equals 1336. Now, this Lockerbie air disaster occurred 1 year and 36 days before the next annular eclipse. That annular eclipse fell on a date with primary numerology of 136. And again, the air disaster 1 year, 36 days before it. So that alone is kind of interesting. But what about Solar Saros 136? Because this eclipse here is 121. Again, the brown lunation numbers and both solar and lunar Saros series numbers are brand new to the calculator. I just added these last week. People who join the website as an enthusiast or mystic member will get access to these new awesome decoding tools. And again, I've been doing this work for 5, almost 6 years without ever asking for money. And I never wanted to do that until I had more to offer. So I'm not out here just giving bum sports picks, asking for people to join my Patreon, trying to provide some real value here. So we're talking about 136 because this eclipse is very connected to that number. But let's look back at this special Solar Saros 136. The dead center of this eclipse series occurred in the year 1991. This is called a middle eclipse because, check this out, it's the 36th of 71 eclipses in this Saros series. That's the exact halfway one. So this was the first middle eclipse we had on Earth in like 150 years. and it was the middle eclipse of Saros 136. Well, if you measure from the Lockerbie air disaster to this eclipse, check out these wild numbers you get. First of all, total solar eclipse equals 202 ordinal. You see that. The word eclipse equals 222 on its own, which is reflected here. This is also exactly a span of 30 months and 3 weeks. And eclipse equals 33 in reduction. This eclipse, the total middle eclipse, which is indicated by the TM here on the page, this occurred on the 192nd day of the year. Notice how the word eclipse equals 192 Latin. Pan Am Flight 103 crashed at exactly 1902 UTC time. Oops. Just want to find this on the page for you. 1902 was when last contact was made and when it crashed. Also notice Saros cycle equals 1092. However, this eclipse was not the next total solar eclipse to occur after the Lockerbie crash. The one that did was exactly 19 months and 2 days after that disaster. Now, if you exclude the end date, it's actually 19 months and 1 day. And we talked about this number, the same digits as 9/11, Society of Jesus 191, Pan American Airways 191. In Latin ordinal, total solar eclipse equals 191. And this crash happened on the winter solstice. 9/11 happened the same year that we had an eclipse on the summer solstice. And notice how both summer and winter solstice has gematria of 191. So the 2001 eclipse on the summer solstice belonged to Saros series 127. Let me just show you that. 6/21/2001. Saros 127. This is really interesting because just a couple months later, towers 1, 2, and 7 were brought down. And check out how the Jesuits sums to 127 in Latin gematria. And right before the Lockerbie air disaster, there was actually an eclipse on 9/11. And that eclipse had numerology of 127. Flight 103 crashed 103 days after that eclipse started. But to wrap this up, I just want to talk about how this connects to one more eclipse from Saros 136. I know I lose people in this parts of the video, but I don't really care. You know, I got the best stuff out of the way, and to me, this is actually the best stuff, but it's kind of hard to wrap your head around if you don't have an understanding of how these cycles work. And there's some people teaching gematria that don't. So the very next eclipse from this Saros to occur, remember we had the middle eclipse in 1991. Well, the next eclipse was in 2009, and this total eclipse here passed directly over the city of Wuhan, China. Remember, Wuhan, China is supposed to be responsible for giving us COVID-19, right? Well, the first approval for the COVID vaccine was on December 14th, 2020, which was the same exact date as a total eclipse over Argentina. And Argentina is home to Pope Francis, who was the first ever Jesuit pope. He's also the 266th pope, which connects to Muammar Gaddafi and the Jesuit motto. Okay, to wrap this up, I'm going to talk about 2 celebrity deaths that occurred last week. And I'm going to talk about how both of these are connected to solar eclipses as well. And I don't seek to make these riddles out of nothing, but sometimes things pile together way too well, and I can't ignore it. And I just want you to think about the 2 names that I'm going to discuss here. First, we have actress Kirstie Alley, who died on December 5th. 1 day later, boxing referee Mills Lane died. And I couldn't help but notice the similarity between the names Alley and Lane. Think about the paths of these twin eclipses. You could perhaps call these a lane or an alley. Remember last month, a rapper named Takeoff was shot and killed outside of a bowling alley. And I talked about how that was connected to a couple eclipses. Well, here we are a month later, and we get the death of an alley and then the death of a lane, 2 words connected to bowling alleys. Notice how the name Kirstie Alley has the same gematria as eclipse sacrifice. This is a riddle I pointed out in my Christine McVie video as well. In reverse reduction, eclipse sacrifice equals 101. Her full name also equals 101, and her death fell 1 year and 1 day after the last total solar eclipse. Now, the number 101 is the 26th prime number. Kirstie died on the date leaving 26 days in the year. And when she died, she was exactly 26,260 days old. It's said that she died of cancer, which equals 26. Her last name, Alley, sums to 26. Her death even fell a span of 2 months and 6 days after the anniversary of Cheers, which first debuted on September 30th. No doubt that Kirstie Alley was probably best known for her role on Cheers, but a few years after Cheers ended, she starred in a new series called Veronica's Closet, and it starred Kirstie Alley here. So this is also heavily connected. Now, when you write out the number 26, you get this value of 42. Kirstie Alley died exactly 42 weeks before Veronica's Closet's 26th anniversary. If you measure from the end of Cheers, May 20th of 1993, to the date that Veronica's Closet began, notice how you get exactly 227 weeks. This means Kirstie Louise Alley was off television for exactly 227 weeks, and her name in ordinal sums to 227. In the ancient Hebrew language, the phrase for total eclipse equals 227. 227 is the 49th prime number. She allegedly died of colon cancer, which equals 49. She was born 409 days before the next total solar eclipse, and she died 490 days before the next total solar eclipse. And these 2 eclipses are from the same Saros series. Given that these eclipses only repeat once every 18 years, this is highly rare. The phrase total eclipse and the word eclipse with capital letters both sum to 137. Kirstie died of cancer a span of 137 days after the last day of Cancer, the sign on the zodiac. Furthermore, her death fell a span of 137 days before the next total eclipse, which is part of a hybrid eclipse. And of course, 137 is the 33rd prime number. Not only does the word eclipse equal 33, but the names Kirstie and Alley have gematria of 33 in various methods. I also thought it was interesting that Veronica's Closet debuted exactly 202 days after the last total solar eclipse, and again, total solar eclipse 202. This show debuted on the date leaving 97 days in the year 97, like Eclipse Sacrifice. Some more interesting connections here with that eclipse, but I want to wrap this up and get to this story about Mills Lane. Mills Lane dying at the age of 85. Mills Lane was the popular boxing referee, and you probably remember this guy, especially if you're closer to my age, for officiating the famous Tyson Holyfield bout in which Mike Tyson bit the ear off of Evander Holyfield. So this guy dies at 85, and that's another value of total solar eclipse, 85. He died on the date 12/6, which is written 6/12 internationally. In the Bible, there's one verse that mentions both a solar and lunar eclipse. That's Revelation 6:12. Now, last month, we just had a total lunar eclipse from Saros 136. Mills Lane died 136 days before the next hybrid eclipse, and his full name, Mills B. Lane III, equals 136. His name also equals 73, and his death fell the 73rd prime number of days after the last eclipse. This guy is a judge in Nevada. Both of those words equal 73 with capital letters. 73 like solar eclipse, sacrifice, and ritual sacrifice. Mills Lane was 1,020 months old when he died. I mentioned this earlier with Muammar Gaddafi dying on 1020. That's the value of sacrifice, and Judge Mills Lane equals 1020. You may recall that he actually was on a show called Judge Mills Lane. This was kind of a knockoff of the Judge Judy type of shows. When Mills Lane died, we see the number 317 in his age. This is the 66th prime number, which connects to eclipse and lane. Mills Lane died in Reno, Nevada. Notice how Reno, Nevada sums to 666. Very significant eclipse number. Mills Lane is a third III 999, which is an upside down 666. In fact, 666 equals 60, which is like the numerology of the date he died. 666 connected to 33. He died 3 weeks, 3 days after his birthday. More eclipse numbers. His full name also equals 269, which is the 57th prime number. And 57 is a number connected to the moon, the number of degrees in the moon's declination. The word moon equals 57. Eclipse equals 57 Hebrew. Mills Lane was 57 years old when Giannis Antetokounmpo was born. And I bring this up because he died on Giannis's birthday. And Giannis is a walking Greek eclipse riddle. In the ancient Greek language, the word eclipse equals 778. Giannis, whose nickname is the Greek Freak, his name sums to 1778 in Greek isopsephy, the same cipher. And he was born on 12/6, this big eclipse date, as shown through the book of Revelation, 6/12. Think about how Giannis's teammate is Drew Holiday, another all-star for the Bucks. Drew Holiday born on 6/12. Giannis was also born in 1994. And in standard gematria, the phrase total solar eclipse equals 994. There seems to be a basketball riddle here too. The word basketball sums to 85. And Mills Lane died at the age of 85 in the year 22. Basketball equals 22. So does the name Lane. The 22nd triangular number is 253, and Giannis Antetokounmpo, 253. Mills died 504 days after Giannis won the title. And check out how the name Giannis Antetokounmpo equals 504. Judge Mills Lane equals 54, like sun. And 54 connects to basketball, because basketball equals the 54th prime number. So definitely something going on with Giannis and the Bucks there. I don't know if it speaks to the Bucks having more success in the postseason again this season or anything like that. I guess that's for a decode for another date. But yeah, just wanted to cover everything I talked about on my blog this past week. If you guys are ever itching for decodes, but I haven't put a new video out, please do feel free to check out the blog, as that's where I do most of my work. A very active blog, pretty much daily, and some of the best decodes on the internet. So once again, this work is listener supported. Please feel free to share, like, subscribe. I don't have a Patreon. I do have memberships on gematrinator.com. And this is a way for me to ensure that if someone cuts me off, I still have access to emails, which Patreon does not allow. So every little bit's appreciated. Thanks. Peace, love, God bless, and we'll talk to you next time. See ya.